Tonight we're in Liverpool and this is Question Time. A big welcome to our audience here, to all of you watching or listening, and of course to tonight's panel, the Conservative Justice Minister, Dominic Raab, Labour's Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, John McDonnell, the UKIP MEP and health spokesman, Louise Bors, the Guardian columnist, Zoe Williams, and the former England and Premier League footballer, Jermaine Genus. Great, thank you very much. And just a reminder, as always, if you want to join in the debate, use Facebook or Twitter. Our hashtag is BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. And if you want to text comments instead, you go to 83981, and pushing the red button will tell you what other viewers are saying. Our first question from James Mitchell, please. Mr. Mitchell.
Will the EU referendum be won based on who can scare the public more?
Will the referendum be won based on who can scare the public more? That was one of the accusations that was made about scare tactics this week. Dominic Raab.
Well, I think we've had a lot of scaremongering from those wanting to stay in, all this talk about a leap into the darkness. I think we need to debate the substance of this. I'm in favour of leaving the European Union, partly because I think if I look at the effect of pulling back democratic control over our laws and our regulation, we'll be able to have the right balance to promote business growth, which is good for jobs, the right balance to make sure we have cheaper energy bills, cheaper food bills, but also be freed up to trade more energetically with the real growth areas in the world like Latin America and Asia. I also, frankly, whether you're on the left or on the right, think you should have stronger democratic control over the laws of the land, and 60% of them now are made in or derived from the EU. So I think the EU has really tested to breaking point the democratic contract. And I think if we go on down that path, we will only erode public trust in our political class even more.
The way that other government ministers who, like you, want out, have called the government's own claims dodgy, baloney, miserable, negative, fear-based. Do you agree with that?
Well, I choose my own words to describe it. I think there is a lot of Project Fear coming out, almost like a scare story every day. And I don't think anyone credibly believes it. We heard this week the suggestion that we'd be locked out of trade. Actually, if you look at what Britain's former ambassador to the EU, Lord Kerr, has said, there's no doubt we'd keep having a strong trading relationship with the EU if we were out. The CBI have said we'd have a high-level, ambitious free trade deal. And even the Prime Minister has said it would be scaremongering to suggest otherwise. So let's talk about the facts and the substance and enlighten the debate, not try and cast a shadow over it.
And was Ian Duncan Smith, who's one of your Brexit ministers, was he scaremongering when he said UK would be more vulnerable to a Paris-style terror attack if we stayed in the EU? Is that true?
I think there's a real issue around border controls. And if you look at what Rob Wainwright, who's the head of Europol, has said, he says we've got 5,000 terrorist suspects or people who have been to terrorist camps who have been out there and come back, and they're flowing freely, or at least potentially, because we haven't got control of our borders. So I think the border control issue does have an implication for security, yes.
OK. John McDonnell.
Well, I just think both sides now should just calm down a bit. I think most of us just want a sensible, rational debate and discussion. And I don't think people should be frightened into voting either way. I voted against joining the common market. I'm old enough to have had a vote originally. I voted against going to the common market. But the longer the European Union is developed now, I've come to a view in the short term, because of the fragility of our economy, I think withdrawal would set us backwards. Withdrawal from a market that actually almost 50% of our trade is with, I think would destabilise our economy when we're in such a fragile position. But I want to move the debate on into, I think we should have a longer-term vision for Europe. And I think the key issues that we face in the 21st century, we have to do on an international level across Europe. And if you look at what those key issues are, they're about peace, to be frank. People just accept peace for granted within Europe. And we can't, it's only 70 years ago, my father was in the British Army. Before that, my grandfather was in the First World War. Europe has secured us peace, and by including more and more states in the European Union, we consolidate that peace.
Just trying to work out where you stand on this. You said something rather interesting. You said, in the short term, I think we should stay. Do you mean in the long term, Labour's policy
I'm trying to
would be to pull out?
I'm trying to say two things. One is, in the short term, I think there are risks, and I don't want to...
Are you going to vote in or out?
I'm going to vote in, but let me finish my point, David, if I can. In the long term, I think we've got to pitch this debate on the long-term future of our country and Europe. And the long term, the advantages of these, that we continue to secure peace, that the big issue that's facing us now is climate change. We can only tackle that on a European basis and globally. In addition to that, mass migration, we've just seen the problems that we've got now. We can only do that through cooperation. But also, I have to say as well, there's this argument we've ceded sovereignty to European institutions. We've ceded sovereignty to multinational corporations. And the only way we can tackle them and bring them under some form of democratic control, including making sure they pay their taxes, is on a European scale. So on those bases, both short-term and long-term, my view now is we remain in.
OK. You said, man with respect, please.
But, John, you say that you want to stay in the European Union to give more democratic control over business. But whilst we're within the European Union, it's illegal to expand state ownership of business. So how does that aid democratic control over business?
That's a great question. If we stay in, we've got to have our reform agenda. And what's interesting, right the way across Europe now, we're working with socialist and social democratic and other progressive parties to develop that reform agenda, which means ensuring more democratic control at the local level, subsidiarity really works, but also come to common agreements how we democratically control, for example, the flow of capital, ensuring that we get the long-term investment that we need that shares prosperity right the way across Europe.
All right.
We can only do that on a European basis.
Jermaine, do you think that the parties are trying to scare the public in how to vote?
I do think there's an element of scaremongering. I don't... You know, my position on this is I can't make an educated decision based on I don't feel like I'm being given enough facts, you know, from one way or another. And it's just... It's hard enough as it is. And, you know, then you've got the Boris situation with Cameron and the squabbling, and it's like you're getting pulled from pillar to post. Now, the scaremongering tactics, if I can use a footballing phrase, look, this has been used by footballers and agents for years. You know, you get a top player at a club, let's just use Wayne Rooney, for example, and he wants a new deal at that club, and the agent will then go to Real Madrid or go to Liverpool, and he'll go, right, get interested in our player. And he will almost force Manchester United's hand to make sure he gets the deal that he wants. And it's no different, really, what they're doing.
In politics, who plays which part in this? who's your Wayne Rooney?
Oh, I'm not going to go down that road.
OK.
Jermaine's made a good point, though. We've been dragged into this issue over an issue of the Conservative leadership. And I don't think that's the main issue. And that's what's happening. We're seeing a fight between Boris and Osborne, which I think is detracting from a proper debate that we should be having, a rational debate.
In fairness, there is only... In fairness, whether your view is that you want state ownership or, like me, you want to see a more free enterprise model, the truth is it's only this government that has given you all, whether you're in this room or watching at home, a say, a voice, the choice. And I think it's a once-in-a-generation lifetime. I think John and I and all of the panellists want to shed some light on it, not to shed the shade of darkness and all the rest of it. But actually, in the last analysis, you're the ones that have the say. And in fairness, I disagree with the Prime Minister on this, but I would pay huge credit to him to giving the British people a say after 40 years.
OK. Yes, sir.
With all the scaremongering that's going on in the media about this, I don't see how us as the general public can make an informed decision. Like, you've seen Hollande's comments today about leaving the EU and saying the economic impact that will have. But reading all the articles we see in the newspapers, there doesn't seem to be any fact. It's just all sides saying different things, and you just don't know who to believe.
And when you say you don't know who to believe, you think that the arguments are not meeting each other? Everybody just says what they think will win you over. And in fact, what you're saying is it's not winning you over at all because you don't believe any of them.
Yeah, I just don't believe what they're saying because I just think they've got their own agendas and I just don't know how to vote in the referendum.
Zoe Williams.
Well, look, I mean, not only are both sides using scare tactics, I think both sides are relying over heavily on economic arguments which they can't even justify. So they're basically making arguments like, do this because otherwise it will cost you more. No, do this because otherwise it will cost you more that way. And it's not only incredible, you know, you don't really believe it, but it's really insulting. Most of us don't make choices based on how much a tin of beans costs. You know, it's just very insulting, it's very uninspiring. At the moment, I think Brexit are making a slightly better hope case, while kind of ins are making a kind of fear case. I would like to see the inside making a much better case for a kind of hopeful Europe. And I think, even though you're right, that it's you know, it's there for peace, it's there to combat climate change, it's there to deal with mass migration in a cooperative way. You've got to make a case for something good happening as a result of Europe. You know, I would say it's good to be part of Europe because you can kind of build a renewables program that you share across the continent. It's good to be part of Europe because it's kind of the most dense knowledge-based economy with the best universities in the world, and we share that infrastructure and it's ours to use. I would say there are kind of really good hope cases to be made, but obviously only if you're in and you're lobbying for those cases. But whenever I write that, somebody always says, so hang on a sec, you want us to believe in a Europe that doesn't exist, that is completely the opposite to the way it is now, in order that we vote for it, in order that we change it, even though we never do. And I'm like, well, yeah, basically.
Louise Bors.
In answer to the first question, I think absolutely scare tactics will be used, and I have no doubt they will continue to be used right up until June the 23rd. I do hope the Brexit campaign doesn't go down the route that the In campaign seem to be going down at the moment, which is just fraught with huge, mammoth scare stories on a daily basis. Because I think several of the panellists and indeed several members of the audience have already alluded to it, that what's happening is there's no actual kind of tangible facts being pushed out there by either side. What we have is politicians who are just spouting lots of statistics that back up their arguments, and we all know statistics can be made to back up anything we want to say, instead of making a positive case for what a fantastic country this is, you know, with the 5th largest economy in the world. You know, if you think in terms of our soft power across the globe, in terms of football, sport, music, arts, culture, we have tremendous influence across the world. We contribute massively to that soft power economy. And I think those kind of things are not talked about enough. In reference to a point that John made, I mean, it certainly isn't the European Union that have kept peace in Europe, it is NATO. And in fact, I think we will sort of acknowledge that.
Louise, sorry, if it's so simple to prescribe how the argument should be fought by people like you on Brexit, why can't you get your campaign together? You've got two campaigns that seem to spend most of their time sniping at each other.
Absolutely, and that's a very, very bad thing, and it's a very bad show. And I wish that these people who are at the head of these campaigns will put their egos aside and come together for the good of the Brexit campaign. And I'm hopeful that that will happen.
What is it you've got against each other? I don't know which side you're on this. You're on the Farage side, presumably.
I'm not on any side. There you go. I'm not on either side. I want a campaign that is going to give people not facts and acronyms and mad statistics. I want to see the fundamental case for Europe. You know, what a great country we are, supporting our SMEs, supporting business in this country, entrepreneurship, inventiveness, all these fantastic things that we give to the world. And, you know, it's a marvellous place to live. We're very, very lucky. And that's the kind of message I want to give.
Okay. And the woman at the very back there, on the right.
I just wanted to say that we need clarification, really, on the main salient facts. For example, in October, we've got the relaxation of the visas for the Turkish nationals. Does that mean that we're going to get an influx of migrant workers from Turkey? Have we got any say in that? Can we say no?
I mean, we all have to bear in mind that one of those, you picked up a really, really interesting point. One of the things that everybody's pushing for, including Mr Cameron, is for Turkey to be a full member of the European Union. And that opens our borders to another 75 million people, which, you know, we have to look at our infrastructure and our public services, which in many places here in the northwest are, you know, are at capacity. Could we really cope with that?
Let's hear from some more members of the audience. The man in the blue shirt there, and then I'll come over to you. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, Jermaine was talking about facts, and obviously John sat there as a Labour representative. If you look at Stuart Rose yesterday and what he told to the Treasury Select Committee, where he confirmed that the Bank of England report that stated how immigration had impacted on the low and semi-skilled workers. That's 6 million workers in this country that have been affected by immigration that have got a reduced standard of living. Yeah. How can a Labour representative sit there and say you're going to vote to stay in when it's having such a dramatic effect on so many people, 6 million people in this country?
But what do you think? What do you think of what Lord Rose in effect said, therefore, was that if you vote to leave the EU, wages will go up for 6 million people? Do you think he meant to say that?
Yes, because...
He clarified his comments, yeah.
He explained, you know, it's supply and demand. I mean, for years now, the left has been saying the same thing. You know, immigration is good, it creates jobs. Yes, it does, that much is true. But the wage compression effect is massive. Okay. So it makes you wonder then, for like Stuart Rose and all of the people writing these letters from the footsie, what do they really care about? Do they care about the wages of British people, or do they care about profits that can be made for these big multinational companies?
All right, I'll go over to you up there. Behind you, the man behind you, and then I will come to you.
I think there is a lot of confusing facts out there at the minute, but I think what's definitely clear is, especially the Eurozone's failed, isn't it time to get hold of our currency and also get control of our economy before we press forward into the world? Just get Britain sorted first.
You're a Brexiter.
I am.
And the woman in front of you?
I'm a Brexiter as well, and if you look at what's happened with the refugee crisis over the last 6 months, how am I supposed to believe in Europe when all the countries are squabbling about what to do with the refugee crisis? They can't decide what's best for Europe, so how are they going to decide what's best for us, and how am I supposed to think it's good to stay in?
Okay, we've got a question about that, which I'll take in just a moment. Let's just hear from you, sir, over there, and you in the front. I'll take you at the front in the second row first, and then you behind.
I am very much divided over this issue, but I'm very confused about Labour's position. I was watching Prime Minister's questions yesterday, and as far as I'm concerned, it looks like Jeremy Corbyn and the whole of the front bench just want this issue to go away because it's not on their agenda.
John MacDonald, what do you say to that? And let me just add to that what the leader of the Green Party said today, that she was concerned by the relative silence from the Labour leadership on the referendum.
Okay,
why is this?
Well, it's not silence, and to be frank, the focus of the debate seems to have been the divisions within the Conservative Party so far. And I think now's the time, you're right, now's the time for Labour itself. And Alan Johnson's been doing various meetings around the country expressing our policy. But I think you're right, now's the time for us to actually come out a bit more in terms of explaining our views. And the view is that we want to transform Europe. We don't want the EU as it now is. We have our own reform agenda. And it is about protecting wages. It's making sure we enforce trade union rights. And the benefits that we've had so far is actually our campaigns in Europe have actually developed issues around paternity leave, maternity leave, some protection for workers themselves, which this government is trying to undermine. So we've used Europe as the vehicle to protect that.
But why haven't you been campaigning on this? I mean, 3 weeks have gone past already.
Well, we are.
Did you decide not to and let the Tories fight each other, or what?
Enjoyable though that has been at times, but no, not at all.
Are you saying Jeremy Corbyn and you are both going to come out fighting?
Well, we've been out there, but I think we've been crowded out of the media because of what's happened in the Tory party. But we will be out there on the stump arguing for our case. But our case is not... Look, we've got Europhiles and Europhobes. You know, those who accept everything that's about Europe that is good, those who detest Europe. Our position is a rational one, which is we believe it's in the best interest to remain within the EU, but there are real issues that have to be addressed. And we've got to... Let me just finish. We've got to develop a reform agenda, and that is about protecting wages. It is about developing trade union rights. It is about long-term investment. It is about having, and exactly as Zoe said, a real vision for the future, one of hope. Well,
all right.
let me just say that agenda is being developed right the way across Europe with other socialist and social democratic parties.
We've got the point twice now. Dominic Raab, do you want to comment on what John McDonnell said?
Well, I think the truth is, in fairness, there are different views within the Labour Party, and that's perfectly respectable. We're not clones in the Tory Party, we're not clones in the Labour Party. And Frank Field, who's one of the most respected, I think, Labour figures, has talked very much about the social impact of immigration, and that's been the key reason, the lack of border controls, why he's come out for Brexit. I wondered if I may briefly pick up on the point the gentleman made about businesses and Lord Rose's comments. The key thing about the EU is we get huge amounts of red tape, but the big businesses with the big HR departments and the lawyers are much better placed to deal with it. The Commission's own advisory group say that their red tape hits small businesses 10 times harder than big businesses. Well, up here in the northwest, 99% of the firms are small businesses, and 2/3 of the employment is through small businesses. So do you want to stick up for the big corporations in hock with the EU, or do you want to stand up for the little guy, which is the worker and the small businesses?
Are we throwing light on this issue? What? You're shaking your heads. The man up there. You, sir, with the glasses, yes.
Yeah, I think we're skirting around a major issue here, which is democracy. British democracy is a beacon around the world, and the European Union is inherently undemocratic the way it works. And this is the last chance we're going to get to vote on this for a long, long time. I think it's really important that people realise that democracy is at the heart of the election here.
OK, and the woman here in the second row.
Well, John McDonnell keeps talking about the reform agenda, and isn't the whole point that attempts at reform, where is your potency to have reform within the current EU system?
Yeah. OK, I'll leave that as a question, and the man behind with the...
So it's on a similar theme. How long would you allow for this reform agenda? You know, if you're going to allow one,
well, if you vote to stay in, how long would you allow?
How long would you allow? Yes.
Sorry. Well, look, I've got a massive problem with this democratic thing. There is a democratic deficit in Europe, for sure. Nobody would say it was perfect. Nobody does say it's perfect, except for the In campaign, which I think is making a mistake. But when you say it's a democratic deficit, you've got to look at something like the environment. The European Union, over the past 20 years, has acted almost as an environmental union. Everybody said, we want this for the environment, we want clean beaches, we want clean air, and Europe brought that into play, and they did it with very, very slow laws, which are very, very difficult to unpick. If you compare that to the way British governments work, a government will say, we'll be hugging a husky, no, hang on a sec, a hoodie, no, a husky, 1 week, and then come in, suddenly the renewables programme is pulled back, suddenly renewables are back on the table, suddenly their commitments are this, suddenly their commitments are not this. You know, you see a huge amount of tergiversation with national governments, which bears no relation to the things that we've democratically asked for. So the idea that just by being kind of outside Europe we'll get the democracy that we deserve, I think is wrong.
OK, I'm going to move on to... Because each week we do quite a substantial chunk on this, but I want to pick up the question that a woman up there put, and Catherine Boots here has it. Catherine.
Has the migrant crisis been mishandled by the European countries?
Has the migrant crisis been mishandled? Louise Bors.
Absolutely. We had at the beginning of it, obviously I'm sure all of you remember Angela Merkel basically saying, everyone come. The doors are open. And then today, or yesterday, today I think it was, we had Donald Tusk, who is the president of the European Council, saying, don't come, it's closed, you cannot come. So we've had this huge open arm invitation, and now we have this huge stop, don't come, you're not wanted. Of course it's been mishandled. It was so silly to say what she did initially, not knowing how many would come, not knowing how they would come, and also not taking into consideration at all the terrorist threat that exists at the moment in those countries. And we have to all, you know, we have to admit that when these migrants are coming, I mean, the European Union figures themselves are saying now that roughly 5,000 jihadists have already made their way onto the continent with the migrant/refugees.
You said more than that, didn't you? You said the cultures that people came are wrong, and you blamed those attacks in Cologne on the people who'd been allowed in and said that was very foolish. That wasn't. You weren't talking about jihadists.
Look, we have to. No, absolutely. We have to accept that the people who are coming are culturally different from us. Sometimes that's a great thing, and cultures can integrate, and we all live very happily. What Cologne showed to us was that these huge numbers of young males, you know, obviously who see women as very, very differently to Western men, how they see women. And unfortunately, those mass sexual assaults didn't just happen in Cologne, they happened in Helsinki and across Europe, and they were organised. And that is a very frightening thing for people in this country, because if you then have, in Germany, signs being put up in swimming pools and public buildings for women saying what you can do, what you can't do, you mustn't smile, you mustn't wear your...
I think we've got the point.
Wrong.
I'm sorry to stop you. There's
wrong.
so many people around this table. I have to bring them all in. Jermaine, what's your view of that?
Look, I mean, I think the road that Angela Merkel went down was pretty ridiculous, to be honest with you, and it caused, well, it could cause chaos, to be honest with you. I think, I spoke about facts when I spoke about the EU and whether to stay in or whether to leave. I wanted some type of facts. The way they've handled this situation is something that probably takes me away from that, because I think it's been completely mishandled. It doesn't give me any confidence, so to speak, within the EU. You know, I would like to probably see more of a pro rata type basis and handling of the situation, look at each country's economic value, basically, how much land they've actually got, and deal with the situation like that. I don't think it's definitely not something that we can turn our backs on. It's there, and we need to deal with it in that type of way, I feel.
Dominic Raab.
That's the key to it. We've got to have an immigration system that people have confidence in. And the truth is, and put the asylum seekers, the genuine refugees, those fleeing persecution to one side for a moment. They're
that was what her question is about.
They're relatively...
Let's stick with her question,
OK,
though.
but they're a relatively small proportion, and we should certainly treat them humanely and make sure that we offer them safe haven. But
a million, 1.5 million,
sorry,
is that relatively small?
David, sorry.
No, is that small?
The vast majority coming through Calais and through those routes from Syria, through the Mediterranean, whether we call them refugees or not, they're coming actually for a better life. They're what we, in that rather unsavoury phrase, call economic migrants. And the truth is, we need to do three things to restore trust in our immigration system. One, make sure that people come here can be self-sufficient. Secondly, make sure if they break the law, they can be removed from this country. And three, have some control over the raw numbers because of the pressures on wages, as has already been mentioned, because of the pressures on public services. We cannot do any of those three things from within the EU. And that's why I wish we could, but we can't. If you want to restore public confidence in our border controls, you have to leave the European Union.
And go back to the questioner, Catherine.
May I interrupt? All the heads of government have put millions of pounds for the migrants, yes, to help them. Where's the help? There's thousands of them at the border, young children. There should be people sent out there with the millions you're sending out there for nurses, builders. Them tents are no use. You're putting children in tents in the middle of winter. The time we've been in this situation, since last year, nothing's been done. You've got a few tents and a few toilets, 42 toilets in one camp for 8,000 people. How is that good for the migrants? Put some money where it's seen. I can't see any money going out there.
Zoe Williams.
I'm surprised to hear Dominic say that these are economic migrants rather than refugees, because we know there's a war in Syria. We know there are violent situations in Iraq, Afghanistan, Central African Republic, Eritrea. We know where the refugees are coming from, and we know what they're fleeing. So the idea that most of them are economic migrants is patently untrue.
Well, so you don't know that.
Furthermore, yes, I do know that. I actually do know that.
You don't.
Yeah, I do.
It would be impossible for you to know that. But look, some of them are fleeing persecution.
Can I just tell you that nobody puts their children on a black dinghy across that strait if it's not safer on the boat than it is on the land? And I
been in Lesbos. I've seen these people come in. 850,000 people came through Lesbos last year. It's an awe-inspiringly dangerous journey and a very expensive one, funneling money right back into the smugglers.
And we'll get more
Hang on
of those tragic cases if we don't deal with the problem in the region at source. And we're putting more money than any other European country to try and do that. But if you just open your borders, which is John's position, you'll find that the problem gets worse, not better.
And remember, they are leaving a safe country. Why do they put them in the boat?
I know.
Why do they put them in the boat? Where from Turkey? Turkey is a safe country.
All right, finish,
Why
Zoe,
take
and then
that
I'll
risk?
get... All right,
Why take
one
that
at a
risk?
time, please, not two at a time.
The point is, OK, it's fine. Go and solve the problem at source if you think you can. But in the meantime, we're signatories to the Refugee Convention. When people are fleeing for their lives, they don't listen to Merkel or Tusk particularly. They flee danger. And we've got duties as human beings to care for them. Now, you might have a long-term plan to deal with Syria, but until you make it work...
The EU system says you go to your first port of entry, and then you have an allocation of...
Well, Donald Tusk is now saying, do not come to Europe, do not believe the smugglers, do not risk your lives and your money, it's all for nothing. John MacDonald.
Okay. Can you remember only a year ago that body of the baby picked up off the beach? Can you remember that? That's how desperate things were, where people were coming across, exactly as Zoe said, on life rafts and all the rest, and they were fleeing, sorry, they were fleeing, let me just...
Sorry, John, just hold a second. Wait a minute, start again so we can hear the point.
Sorry, that man was in safety, he was living in a camp, he put his children in danger, he brought his child across, he was responsible. Nobody else.
They were fleeing a war zone. They were fleeing a war zone, and then when they get to Turkey, they had no assistance whatsoever, and they were absolute desperation. They were absolute desperation. The whole, if you look at the refugee system that we're in at the moment, I take Dominic's point seriously. We've got to resolve the situation at source, and that means trying to secure peace in Syria itself through the negotiations. I have to say, us bombing Syria doesn't help in that situation. If I just finish on this.
Well, no,
I believe that we have a duty, humanitarian duty, to do all, exactly as this lady has said, everything we can to assist the refugees themselves. The only way you can do that is if countries come together in a coordinated way, add together their resources, help all we can, of course, around the Syrian borders themselves, but also, actually, if people have to be resettled, we do it on a planned basis, exactly as Jermaine has said, you do it on a planned and cooperative basis right the way across Europe. As a country, to be frank, in comparison with other European countries, we've failed dismally.
Use Catherine Booth's question, if you could answer just briefly that. Has the crisis been mishandled by the heads of the European countries?
I believe it's been mishandled by every European state, and that includes our one.
All right.
We need to do more, and we need to cooperate to achieve it.
You, sir, there, and then I'll come to you up there. Yes.
I take it the panel watches the internet. If you watch the internet, you will find that half of the stuff you see on the media on the telly is edited. Half of them immigrants, they don't want the water, they don't want the food, they want money, and they want to try to get to Britain.
Okay. And you up there, yes, the woman up there, and I'll come to you.
Yeah, I volunteer at a local refugee crisis centre, and I think for Louise to basically brand them as people who come here searching for money and for...
I didn't say that.
Okay, you said about their opinions of women, all of these different things. They're fleeing from war zones. Can you imagine how you would feel to have to leave everything behind you, to leave your family?
You made your point. No, you can't. She just commented on what you said. That's fair enough.
I didn't say that, though. She just made that up.
Yes, you.
This union is supposed to be based on unity and solidarity, and each of these member states are just they don't see them as people, they just see them as just nothing really, and it's not on, and I don't see why, I don't see how people can say that remaining in the EU is good if the leaders are going to act in this way. I think it's absolutely disgusting the way they've handled it.
Yeah. Okay, I'll take a point from you, sir, and then we go on. Yes, the man in the check shirt.
A lot of people are linking immigration to terrorism. Not all immigrants are terrorists, we know that. But I don't want to link the immigration argument to terrorism. The country cannot cope. The infrastructure, the NHS, housing, it's that we can't cope with the immigrants. We cannot cope.
All right.
Thank
you very much. Now, I want to go on. I want to go on because I don't want to stick on Europe for the whole programme this week. I want to carry on. No, wait. Just to say where we're going to be next week, which is Dundee and then Chelmsford. And the way to get into this audience and have these arguments, it's on the screen there. You can either call us or you can apply to our website. Right, a question from Barry Pickard, please.
Cutting the top rank of income tax from 50 to 45p raised an extra £8 billion from the super rich. Should it now be cut to 40p?
Should we now cut income tax to 40p because, as the Chancellor of the Exchequer claimed, it gained £8 billion when they reduced it by 5p? John McDonnell?
Well, within hours of George Osborne making that claim, it was refuted by the Institute for Fiscal Studies and many others, because what happened is that we saw a huge exercise in tax planning. So people delayed certain payments and bonuses, etc., until that tax regime was reduced. So instead of paying it in the year when it was at 50p, they then delayed that, and so you had an artificial low one year and an artificial high the next year. And what the IFS has said is over the next 5-year period, actually it will cost us, and they're saying about 360 million, something like that. So actually the reduction didn't gain us anything, it's cost us everything. My view is that I think that the wealthy and the corporations and others should pay their taxes and pay a fair rate of tax and shoulder the burden that the rest of us do.
Okay. And as Shadow Chancellor, what rate of tax would you have at the top?
We oppose the 45p and we would put it back to the 50p and leave it at that.
No higher than that?
No, we'd leave it at that.
I thought you wanted to go to 60 at one point.
That was years ago.
You wanted
Actually,
to
there is a good point, to be honest. This whole debate around income tax, I think, is not the issue. The issue is the corporations paying their taxes. Look at Google and all the others. We need a fair tax system, and we need to ensure corporations pay their way. No one else in this audience would have been able to do a deal like Google did, where they put off their taxes for 10 years and then only pay a tenth of what they should have paid. That's outrageous. So the debate, I think, is moving on to tax justice rather than issues around income tax.
Dominic Raab.
So first of all, on the tax deficit, the difference between the tax owed and the tax collected, it is at its lowest level on record. So we have done a huge amount to deal with that particular problem. On tax cutting, when you cut taxes, you spur innovation, jobs growth, and that brings in more revenue. So I think, in principle, it's a good thing. But I think, for me, the focus would be on lower middle incomes. And if you look at what we've done since 2010, those earning £10,000 to £15,000, so lowish incomes, are paying 60% less tax than in 2010. And if you're a millionaire, you're paying 12.4% more tax. So I think those tax cuts are a good example of something that's good for the economy and good for our society. And when I look at Labour, the first real tax policy that they've come out with is raising the basic rate of tax. Now, you're talking about people on £11,000. For the Labour Party, raising taxes is the closest thing they've got to religion. And it's not just bad for enterprise and jobs, it's also bad for our society. Am I wrong about the basic rate?
Please serious.
Am I wrong about the basic rate?
We've not said about increasing the basic rate. What I've said consistently is we're not focusing at all on income tax.
You're misleading this audience. Jeremy Corbyn has said crystal clear he wants to raise the basic rate of tax. Now, that may be legitimate, but be honest about it.
Look, John, be straight about this. We've said consistently on the 45p rate it was a mistake to reduce it from 50p. But we've also said we're not interested in increasing the basic rate of tax. What we're interested in is collecting the taxes from the corporations and making sure there's a fair taxation system.
That's the quickest U-turn in opposition I've ever seen.
All right. Making it up as you go along.
Jermaine.
Well, I mean, I agree with John's point about the corporations. You know, I think that issue definitely needs to be addressed. I think it's also probably naive to think if we reduce the level of tax from 45p to 40p, that is then in turn going to create more money, as that figure tried to put across. But look, I think most people are quite happy to pay their way to support our sectors. Now, our sectors, for me, are struggling. Teachers, our schools, our NHS are bursting at the seams. Now, we need to raise money for those sectors to support them. Now, if that means that the rate of tax has to be pushed up to 50p, then it does. It's as simple as that.
OK. Louise Moores.
These kind of questions always confuse me. I don't know about people sitting in the audience and at home, but when you hear Conservatives and Labour just argue and back up, you know, they're so determined that each of them are right, it always gets very confusing.
Doesn't UKIP believe it's right?
They never do that.
Well, no, what I would like to see, I mean, we have the most complex tax system, I think, in the world. It's tens of thousands of pages long, our tax system. What I would like to see all simplified. I'd like to take people who earn minimum wage, for example, out of tax and national insurance altogether. I don't think they should be paying tax and national insurance if you're earning the minimum wage, so that would be a help. But we have to target those who make avoiding tax a profession. And we all know who those are, don't we? All the big corporations. And I would like to see a real will within the government to go after those big corporations so that they pay their fair share, because it can never be right in a society where we have people on minimum wage paying tax and national insurance, and we have the likes of Google and Starbucks and all the rest of them paying absolutely nothing.
To do that, though, you have to have international agreements. You voted against the European Union.
Of course.
On those
do I want
agreements.
the European Union? Hang on, ladies and gentlemen. Do you want the European Union? Do you want the European Union having a hold over your taxes?
No, they won't.
Yes, they will.
Country by country reporting.
John, I sit there and I listen to it every week.
Consistently.
No, I sit there and listen to it every week. What they want is tax harmonisation across the European Union. These are the things that John and the Labour Party want us to stay part of.
Can you just answer the question that John's put to you?
You voted against country-by-country reporting so we could identify how much tax should be paid in each country. You voted against that consistently.
We voted, and we always vote, and will continue to vote, against anything that hands any further powers to the Commission and to the European Union. No, it didn't. Because when you actually read the thing, you all read in the Labour MEPs in such a vague way.
All right, this is going nowhere fast. You in the front here, and then I'll come to you, Zoe. No, the man here in the front.
OK, I've got some advice to the Chancellor. Cut Ian Duncan Smith, save the country a fortune, and you could have a promotion on the way, Dominic.
That's very generous of
Zoe Williams.
I will respectfully decline.
Zoe Williams, and I'll come to you.
This chap really hates Ian Duncan Smith, so I'm with you. Just to return to the question, what I find really worrying about George Osborne and his £8 billion figure is that I don't think he did make a mistake. I think he knew that wasn't true. And we do seem to be living through a kind of post-truth politics where there's no kind of onus upon them to say what is actually true anymore. And I would really like to see him held to account more on that. You can't say, we saved £8 billion when you know full well it was just deferred tax from one year to the next. And you really should be held up on it. On the basic level of income tax, it's a really blunt tool. Most people on really low incomes who are taken out of income tax, that money was clawed back through reductions in their tax credits. And the people who really won from the raising of the minimum threshold were people in middle and high incomes. So, again, I think it's a huge amount of deliberate mendacity which makes us all think, oh, I don't know who's telling the truth. The fact is, they're not telling the truth often enough.
OK, but the one here.
If George Osborne did save £8 billion, can he not use that to vaccinate our children against meningitis B?
Dominic Raab, and then thank you.
Well, look, there's huge pressures on the public finances. We've cut the deficit by half as a proportion of GDP, but there's still a way to go. So, which is a short way of saying it's one of those things you'd love to do if you could, but there are so many other campaigns, pressure groups, looking to try and find ways to use that money. I've got a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old at home. I know the fear and the concern people have around it. I think it's one of those things we'd love to be able to do if we did have the money. And who knows, with...
vaccinated by next year. My 8 and 9-year-olds won't.
Yeah. Well, look, all I'm saying is that as a parent, I can totally understand the concern around this. You know, you cannot fund these things in the NHS unless you've got a growing, vibrant economy.
Do you anticipate further cuts in the budget in 3 weeks' time?
I can't preempt the Chancellor what he's going to do. I think we've got to make sure that we've got stable public finances. We continue on the stable path we're going, and when we've got the room to do it, we invest in the vital things, whether it's the meningitis or other parts of the NHS, and we make sure people have more pounds and pence in their pocket, particularly low and middle income workers.
I'll take a couple more points and then we'll go on to another question. You, sir, there, yes.
The reality is we're all going to have to pay more tax. Why aren't the politicians more honest about it? We seem to be in this race for the bottom. Everybody wants to cut tax. We're living longer. There's more care needed. There are people that are going to be missing out because of all the cuts, particularly in Liverpool, in social care packages. We're going to have to pay more tax. So let's be grown up about it, and let's have the politicians admitting it. And let's have a rational debate.
And the man behind you. You, sir.
Am I wrong in believing that Labour, for 12.5 years of a 13-year government, had the higher tax rate at 40%? Is that not true? And now you're trying to be...
Why did you only have 40%?
Now you're trying to be the poor man's best friend.
Yeah. I was on the backbenches then, and I used to put alternative budgets up every year. Let me finish. I used to put up alternative budgets every year, and in that was included a 50p rate.
There you are.
And the argument then was that struck the right balance. And the point that this gentleman made about we're all going to have to pay more taxes, the issue for most people is people don't jib against paying taxes if they think the system is fair. None of us now think the system is fair because we're seeing the wealthiest and the corporations laugh all the way to the bank by manipulating the tax system.
I'll just take a couple more quick questions before we come to the end of the programme. We've got another 10 minutes or so, and I think both these ones are worth taking. Alan King, first of all, please. Alan King.
When do we start to see Donald Trump as a serious politician?
When do we stop seeing Trump as a joke and see him as a serious politician? What do you think?
What? I don't know when we start seeing him as a serious human being. Look, we see him as a serious threat right now. And if by serious politician you mean serious threat to the entire world, then I say start thinking that now. The problem is there's nothing we can do about it. So, you know, it's that kind of impotent anxiety that isn't going to get us anywhere. It really irritates me because everybody says, you know, this is kind of populist politics, left-wing populism and right-wing populism are both the same. They're not the same. Left-wing populism looks like Bernie Sanders and wants a democratic socialist life where people have more and are happier. And right-wing populism looks like a guy who won't distance himself from the Ku Klux Klan. So, you know.
Do you agree with that, Dominic?
I think that stuff around the Ku Klux Klan and refusing to disavow them, it put him beyond the pale. I think that raised a serious question mark around his integrity. I think I'm also worried about what he might do. He's talking about building a wall, making the Mexicans pay for it, bringing back torture. You know, but the thing is, whether you're a right-wing or a left-wing populist, you prey on the very seductive vulnerabilities of people. You come up with these populist utopian ideas, but you always, in the end, end up breaking your promises. And I think, in the end, the American people will be too smart to vote for that. I certainly hope so.
You're in the fourth row there, yes.
I think we need to look at the kind of anger that Donald Trump is harnessing, but I do agree with Zoe that we should actually consider him more of a threat. And we should be thinking about whether, if he is elected President of the United States, whether that is a man that in any way, shape or form we want to do any business with.
And the woman here in the second row.
Isn't part of the problem that we like democracy until the person who democracy elects isn't somebody that we would choose? And wouldn't somebody like President Assad or Mugabe argue that's why you don't have democracy, because you end up with a Trump?
Louise Moores, do you agree with her?
I've agreed with a couple of things the lady said this evening. Very insightful. Look, I mean, love him or loathe him, the people of the Republican Party they keep voting through. And that is democracy. Just because we don't like him or find his views unpalatable, etc., etc., that really, as far as we're concerned in Great Britain, has nothing to do with us. This election is the United States of America, and just as we don't want them interfering in our democratic process and elections over here, we really have no right to interfere in theirs. Now, whether he wins the nomination and goes forward to the presidential elections, we will have to wait and see. And then the American people can decide. But that's what democracy is all about. It doesn't matter whether we like him. It's what the American people want. And if they're going to vote for him, then they will have the government and the president that they deserve. And that's the important thing. Unless we want to have elections like in the European Union, where you're given a ballot paper, like when we were electing the president of the European Parliament, and we had one candidate, and all we had was yes on the ballot paper. So unless you want elections like that, Donald Trump, he is the Republican Party's choice at the moment.
Okay, man up there.
Are we going to be prepared for the migrant crisis from America?
I didn't quite hear that.
What was that?
Are we going to be prepared for the migrant crisis from America?
Right. And the man in pink there, I want to go to, yes.
Very good.
It's okay, Zoe, saying that we shouldn't poke around in the politics of America and what Trump's doing, but it seems it's okay for us to poke around in the politics of the Middle East when the particular leader over there is going to do it.
All right, Jermaine, I'll come to you, John.
My point is, maybe we should poke around in the politics of the United States.
Jermaine.
I think it's very worrying to me that Donald Trump is getting so far within his political career. He comes across me as a person that seems to thrive on people's insecurities and weaknesses. And I just think, it's easy for us to say, right, it's not our country and let's not get involved. But at some point, we're going to have to deal with America over certain subjects. So do I want that to be Donald Trump? No, I do not.
We have no choice, though.
Well,
we have no choice. It's their choice. It's their choice.
It is their choice, obviously, but that's why I'm saying it's so worrying to me that he's getting so far down the line.
Yeah, nobody's suggesting we intervene in America, Louise. We're just saying it's a bad thing, right?
And that I'll come to you, John. You said in the white
T-shirt. If he becomes president, what then?
All right, hold on. You.
I think the biggest fear for me, I think you're absolutely right, it's America's issue, this. Bigger fear for me is if Jeremy and John's ragtag bunch of socialists get into number 10.
I'd agree with that, sir.
John McDonald, maybe you want to answer him.
Thanks for that. Look, I think we've got to take Trump seriously, and I think I find it extremely worrying about some of the statements that he's made, the instability that he will cause within his own country, and the instability that he could cause globally. It's not interfering in American politics. It's completely, of course, up to the American people. But as friends of the American people, our closest ally, I think as friends we should express our caution and concern about it, that this is someone who actually could damage international relations overall.
So why is he so appealing to the Republican voters?
I think there's a real... within America itself, there's a real disaffection about the system overall, about how large numbers of people now have had their wages suppressed, the public services are collapsing, and if you look at the opinion polls, there's real anger out there, and they're seizing upon Trump as an opportunity to protest against the system itself. Now, I'm hoping that as the debate goes on, the more exposed that he becomes, actually, that people will then say this is not for us, and that there'll be a vote for a candidate who actually will represent all of America rather than one small section. But I think we do have the opportunity as friends of America to actually say this could be damaging to us all. And please, please think carefully.
Okay, last point from you, man.
All I have to say is that really, that's why I'd really prefer to stay in Europe. Because imagine Donald Trump with Putin. And they're the superpowers, aren't they? And there you have a very unsafe planet, really.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. We'll take a last question from James Yates, please. James Yates.
Should tackling in rugby be banned in schools?
You write about medicine yourself, do you?
Yeah, well, just started.
What? You just
started, yeah.
So you know about this issue. Okay.
Not really.
Should tackling in rugby be banned in schools? We know that there's a policy to get millions more children playing rugby. Jermaine, you would know about this.
I mean, initially, when you hear that statement, you feel like saying, well, it would be almost like banning shooting from playing football. You know, if you're playing football, like, kids aren't allowed to shoot no more.
Yeah, I thought you meant something quite different.
Well, it is. It's like...
shooting.
Oh, yeah, sorry. yeah.
Which is not very good.
Took that, yeah, wrong way. But no, it's almost like saying to a young footballer, you can't shoot at goal no more. And I just think that rugby, part of it is tackling. And granted, the injuries that can be sustained aren't great. And what I think we should do is, when I was at school, there was parts where you was on the school field and someone would have a shot, probably somebody wasn't very good, and it would usually hit somebody in the face and they'd have a bloody nose everywhere. So what they made us do was start playing with a sponge football or a really smaller football. Within rugby, I'm sure these do what they can do with American football. You can play tag, have a flag hanging out of your shorts, and they can take that off, or start wearing protective gear. And then as you get older, the layers of protective gear
So you would
come
like
off.
that to happen? You don't want 16, 17, 18-year-olds tackling each other and...
I think it's important that we obviously don't end up with 16, 17-year-olds who have got major issues through getting concussion through early stages of their career. So yeah, I think I would like to see some type of protective gear for these youngsters to wear until they get to that professional stage.
Dominic Raab, we have to go quickly around the table on this. This is an issue. 70 doctors and scientists called for this ban.
No. I think we should try and make all these contact sports a bit safer, but I don't think we should be banning them. We need to be encouraging youngsters to do more sport. It's good for their health. It's also good for other life skills. Okay, very quickly. Yeah. We have the same debate around boxing. I'm a trustee of Fight for Peace in Newham, and it gets a lot of youngsters very difficult to reach into the club to do the competitive martial arts or boxing. But then it also works on their numeracy, their literacy. I got involved mentoring, and all I'm saying is that these kind of sports have got a potential and a power to reach certain youngsters, particularly from tough backgrounds, that nothing else does. So let's not get rid of that.
We have to be very brief. I don't know...
Which is most likely to be brief.
Yes, you can be
No,
the
so I
briefest.
remember interviewing the academic who did this research when she first started out. She's a massive public health epidemiologist, and I was like, what do you want to do rugby for? It's just a weird thing that posh people play. And she said, you've got no idea how dangerous this is. If you knew how dangerous it was and how often people are brain damaged by it, there's no way you would let your children anywhere near it. And I just think all these kind of arguments, oh, it's really good for you to get into the fresh air. You don't need to get a concussion in the fresh air. There are loads of ways to get fit, not concussing yourself.
But it shouldn't be left to parents, not government to decide.
I think if parents knew how dangerous it was, then they would vote with their feet.
John,
There's no way parents...
Can I ask you in a phrase to say whether rugby tackling should be banned?
I think we need to take into account what the doctors are now warning us. And I think on Jermaine's point, you change the techniques, you look at the enhanced protections. In that way, you preserve the sport, but you don't have the risk as well.
Louise?
The benefits outweigh the risks, in my opinion. It teaches our kids teammanship, competitiveness, discipline, respect. I think all team games are very positive. And remember, we want to tackle childhood obesity. It's one of the, that will be a big killer, far bigger killer to our kids than injuries within sport. So let's support it.
One point from our audience. Somebody hasn't spoken before. Yes.
I appreciate and understand what the whole panel have said. However, with many things within school, why aren't the children being asked what they think?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everybody. We've got to stop. Time's up. We're in Dundee next week, as I said earlier on. We have the Conservative leader in Scotland, Ruth Davidson, with us on the panel, and the SNP's Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, on the panel as well. The week after that, we're going to be in Chelmsford. No idea who we're going to have on the panel then. But if you want to come to Dundee or Chelmsford, go to our website or call 0330 123 9988. If you're listening to this on Radio 5 Live, as you know, this debate carries on through the night until 1 or 2 or 3, I don't know when it stops in the morning. A lot to talk about, and that goes on Question Time, Extra Time. But here in Liverpool, my thanks to our panel and to all of you who came to take part in this edition of Question Time. Until next Thursday, from all of us here, good night.
Party Politics, this week's style, with Andrew Neil and guests talking migration. We're on BBC One in a moment.